Can everybody hear me? What's that look like to you? They're grasshoppers, right? That's one possibility of food for Mars astronauts. We'll talk about a little bit about that later. The things I'm going to cover quickly are some various alternative sources of food for a long-term stay on Mars. One is to ship food prepackaged the way they do in the International Space Station, and there's some samples of that stuff going around. Another one would be to grow the fruits and vegetables hydroponically. Another one is aquaponics, which is a kind of a blend of aquaculture and hydroponics. Another alternative is synthetic food and 3D printed food. And then I'll talk about the exotic foods like the grasshoppers. I also want to touch on some necessities if you're going to do this, like having sufficient energy. You're going to have some water, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. So this is what we're doing on the ISS. But what's happened, NASA did a study recently, and they found that over time, and we'll be talking about a long period of time, some of this food will be stored as long as 2.5 years. The nutritional value of the food begins to degrade, even if it's freeze-dried. Unlike the ISS, where the resupply missions are going up every 3 months or so, the resupply missions to Mars are only going to be every 2 years. That's the only time the launch window's open. So in any event, what it does is it makes food shipped from Mars pretty expensive. Now, your Mars station is going to be like the ISS in that it's a kind of a semi-closed system. You're going to be recycling everything, including water. You'll have to have some supplies from the outside. We'll talk a little bit about that later, about the water, which will be one essential thing that has to be. Right now, the ISS is recycling a little better than 90% of the water, but that still leaves you with a deficit of 10%. If you have a garden and you're growing plants in it, they'll remove CO2 from the air and replace it with oxygen, just like they do here. The trick there would be keeping the system in balance. So you'd have to vary the size of the garden, the amount of leaf surface you had, and so forth, depending on the number of people you have. I postulate 10 for most of my calculations, a crew of 10. Keeping everything in balance is going to be the tricky part, and so you're going to have some expertise in this area, and they're doing some research on the ISS. As a matter of fact, I just read the other day that they ate some of the homegrown romaine lettuce for the first time, which is it's good news. So if lettuce can grow in a 0G environment, then I don't think we're going to have any problem in a 38% G situation. That was kind of unknown territory, but it should work. Hydroponic is one alternative. It's being used here on Earth right now. This place is in Brooklyn. It's a big greenhouse, and they grow stuff, and it's distributed locally, so there's no shipping involved. The key to successful hydroponics is you've got to control the heat and the light and the nutrients. And the nutrients will be tailored to whatever it is that you're growing. Again, the farmers are going to be wearing white coats, is what I'm saying. It's a pretty complex process. An example of a really intense hydroponic garden, this one is in Japan, and it's about the size of a football field, maybe 1 acre. And they produce 10,000 heads of lettuce every day. That's 41 times as efficient as growing lettuce in the Imperial Valley, where you get about 2 crops a year. So this is definitely a possibility. You can stack it, use LED lamps so that you can control the amount of daylight that the plants are receiving, the amount of light. I got my figures on the lettuce production from USDA. Another alternative kind of meshes with hydroponics is aquaponics. And aquaponics is a combination of aquaculture and hydroponics. And what you do, this is an example of a small garden where there's fish in the tank below, and then the water is pumped up to the garden above it. And The water, of course, after the fish have been there for very long, is laden with ammonia and nitrogen and all of the thing and a lot of the things that are necessary for plant growth. The trick here, I talked to several people who have these aquaponic gardens up and running. The trick is keeping everything in balance. Again, it's much more complicated than you would think. If this nutrient is too rich, it kills the plants. If it's not rich enough, they also die. So, and the same with the fish. What happens is that the plants actually will end up purifying the water, and then you can put it back in the tank. According to a couple of sources, Hank Burroughs and Mihail Matif, who both have aquaponic gardens, you only need about 10% of the input of new nutrients and water that you do for, say, a regular hydroponic garden. Because it's a recirculating system, it might fit better into our closed Mars settlement. Here's one. Now, this is outside, but his fish are in the pond down below, and then he's got everything plumbed so that it waters the plants with the nutrient-rich water. Things like pH, water temperature, nutrient content, and so forth are going to have to be monitored on a continuous basis in order to make sure that they're right. Because if you let it get out of whack, your plants will start dying, and or your fish will start dying. It's going to require, it's a pretty scientific process. This is another possibility. This is still a nascent technology. The other two are established. The technology is known and pretty well mastered. This is new. What they've done here is this guy over in Holland has grown pork using stem cells taken from pigs. The good news for the pigs are that they don't have to die. They're just donating the stem cells. His major problem is getting the right nutrient mix so that the meat will grow. So, and that problem has not been overcome yet, apparently. But it is a real possibility, and the advantages are pretty clear there too. That can be done in place. It could be done right there on Mars. This is another possibility. 3D printed. Sounds fantastic, but they're actually doing it. That's a sample of what they're doing. Don't know how it tastes, but there's an outfit that's working with, I think they're working with Cornell, making this product here. And it allows them to just artificially create meat. This is another possibility. Insects have an advantage. They're portable, they're light, easy to transport. Like grasshoppers, for example, are really durable little creatures, and they will, so they're not going to have any problem withstanding acceleration and so forth. That doesn't look very appetizing to Westerners, but there are people in Thailand, in southern Mexico, in Uganda, where grasshoppers are considered a delicacy. One of the chief advantages is that a grasshopper can make as much as 9 grams of animal protein with 10 grams of cellulose input, whereas cattle, for example, require 10 grams of vegetable matter to make 1 gram of protein. So they're very efficient. It would be important to remember, if you're going to have those things, that they be contained. You don't want to let them get into the garden. They should have their own grazing area where you just have to do that. Here's some other possibilities. Mushrooms. Mushrooms are very efficient. It's only 3% waste with a mushroom. The root is about all it's wasted. The rest of it's edible. They have a lot of essential nutrients and so forth. They can grow on all sorts of things. You can use them. You can grow them on waste. They don't require a lot of light. They don't have to be kept at warmer temperatures. They can grow in cool places like they do here on Earth in caves and old mines and so forth. So that would be one type of supplement for your diet. Now, to do all this, you're going to need some electricity. You're going to need quite a bit of it. And I've done some calculations. Do not take these to the bank. It's going to require some experimentation to see exactly how much of a solar array you're going to need. This is a sample of one that's in China right now. You'll need rechargeable batteries, probably also some fuel cells to keep the power on at night when your solar array is closed, when it's dark. The advantages to solar power are that as the settlement grows and its power needs go up, as you can just keep adding more panels. And the other advantage is that it's on the shelf. We already have this. None of this requires anything new. We don't have to invent anything. We just have to modify it for use on Mars. Might be a good idea to have a fail-safe system of some kind, maybe a nuclear decay reactor, for example, so that if something does happen to your primary system, everybody isn't going to start dying right away. Because without electricity, electricity is really the staff of life when you're in a place like Mars. Without it, all of a sudden your heat's off, air circulation equipment doesn't work, and everything's out. So you better have a backup system. One of the keys to success for any long-term colony is going to be redundancy. You have to have system redundancies. Otherwise, if something fails, you're really in trouble. And this is basically how the cycle works. Your irradiance levels on Mars range from 30 to 40% of those on Earth. Best photovoltaic cells convert about 20% of that. And assuming the lowest figure, using the lowest figures, 100 square centimeters will generate 2 watts here on Earth and 0.6 of a watt on Mars. So you're going to need 1.67 square meters of solar panels to generate a kilowatt. Now, using statistics, our station, just guessing, our station would use about 5 times as much electricity as the average American household. And so you would need 170 square meters of solar panels just to meet these requirements. And this is how the cycle works, basically. You've got a battery system for storage. Shipping water from Earth is pretty expensive. What it works out to in this case here, based on experience, about 30 liters of water per person per day is required for all uses, for washing and drinking and everything and all that put together. If you're recycling at 90%, that still leaves you with a deficit of 3 liters of water, which if you were to ship it from Earth and you have a crew of 10, the math works out to 11 metric tons of water every year that you would have to ship to Mars, assuming a 90% recycle rate. Well, that's pretty expensive, so what we're hoping is that there'll be some water easily accessible on Mars. And they did a study, and it looks like if you look at the red and the orange zones, there are places where there seems to be subsurface ice. They think it's ice anyway. What they've done is they've been able to detect the hydrogen in the spectrum. And if that is the case, then it'll be much easier to harvest. We know there's water in the polar caps, but the polar caps would not be a good place to have a colony. I mean, for 6 months out of the year, it's night. So water is pretty essential. If you don't have a source of water in situ on Mars, I don't think it's really feasible to have a long-term colony on Mars. If it turns out that it's dry, we're kind of out of luck. But I don't think it is. Doesn't look like it. Okay, comments, questions. The focus of my thinking has been, what do we have that's on the shelf today? Oh, I have the paper that this stuff is based on. I wrote a paper, and I'm going to have copies of it out at my desk out there. I have a vendor table, and if you want a copy, you can get it, and it's got all the sources. I'm thinking of doing everything more or less the conventional way. There may be a lot of alternatives to this to be developed. I'm convinced that after a while, there'll be restaurants all over the world featuring Mars cuisine, because they're going to develop their own food based on their situation. Okay, and anybody who wants to talk to me about this, it's become one of my favorite subjects, so